started as a missing child case. A frantic grandmother on the phone with 911, voice trembling, reporting that her 2-year-old granddaughter hadn't been seen for 31 days. Her daughter's car, she said, smelled like something had died. That call would spark one of the most polarizing criminal investigations in American history. A story that would captivate and divide the nation. And at the center of it all, Casey Anthony. It was July 15, 2008, in Orlando, Florida. The summer heat hung thick in the air, but inside the Anthony home, a storm had been brewing for weeks. Cindy Anthony was desperate. Her daughter Casey had offered excuse after excuse about where little Caylee was. She was with a nanny, she was at the beach, she was at the park. Each time Cindy asked, Casey had a new story, delivered with casual confidence that felt increasingly hollow. But this time was different. Cindy's patience had reached its breaking point. The tension in the house had been simmering beneath the surface. Cindy had gone through Casey's car earlier that day, and what she found made her stomach turn, the unmistakable odor coming from the trunk, a smell she would later describe as the scent of death. Alarmed and panicked, she tracked Casey down at her boyfriend's apartment and demanded to know the truth. No more games, no more stories. That's when everything shifted. What she got instead was a story riddled with inconsistencies. Caylee, she said, had been missing for over a month. Just like that, 31 days, no report, no Amber Alert, no police. And for Cindy, that was the moment the nightmare truly began. Detectives immediately picked up on the irregularities. A mother not reporting her child missing for over a month? That alone raised red flags. It defied every instinct, every ounce of logic. Most parents in that situation would be frantic, calling police within minutes, hours at most, but Casey had carried on as if nothing had happened. No emotional breakdowns, no desperate public pleas, just silence, and a growing web of deception. But Casey's behavior in the days following Caylee's disappearance painted an even stranger picture. Surveillance footage showed her shopping for clothes and groceries, seemingly carefree. Friends later testified that she had been seen out at clubs, drinking, dancing, and laughing. She entered a hot body contest at a local nightclub, posing for pictures and cheering with the crowd. Not exactly the behavior of a mother in mourning. Around the same time, she visited a tattoo parlor and got new ink on her shoulder. Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. It was a message that didn't sit well with investigators or the public. To many, that wasn't the behavior of a distraught mother searching for her missing child. It was something else, something darker, something unsettling. When questioned, Casey spun an elaborate story. She said a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, the nanny she claimed had been watching Caylee, had taken her. She described her in detail, what she looked like, where she lived, what kind of car she drove. But when authorities followed up on the lead, it quickly unraveled. The apartment where Zenaida supposedly lived was vacant. There was no nanny. The person Casey described didn't exist. The deeper investigators dug, the more contradictions they found. Timelines shifted, names changed, alibis crumbled. Lies piled upon lies until they had no choice but to arrest Casey for providing false information to law enforcement. Still, there was no trace of Caylee, not a sighting, not a lead, nothing. Just a growing, aching silence. Search efforts ramped up. What started as a local effort quickly became a national obsession. Hundreds of volunteers combed the area, walking through wooded lots, drainage ditches, and abandoned buildings. Some brought cadaver dogs, trained to detect the faintest trace of human remains. Others searched on foot, clutching flyers, poking through underbrush with sticks, hoping, desperately, to find something, anything. The case dominated headlines. News channels ran 24/7 coverage, with live updates, press conferences, and endless panel discussions. Talk shows debated the possibility of foul play and speculated about Casey's motives. Was it an accident, a cover-up, or something more sinister? Online forums lit up with theories, each more detailed and intense than the last. Amateur sleuths dissected Casey's every move, her facial expressions in court, her text messages, even her MySpace posts. The public was gripped. Caylee had become everyone's child. America wanted answers, and they wanted justice for Caylee. Then, in December of that year, just under 6 months after she was last seen, a grim discovery shattered any lingering hope. A county utility worker had ventured into a wooded area near the Anthony home to relieve himself during a break. That's when he noticed something strange. What looked like a small skull partially buried in the brush. Authorities were called immediately. What they uncovered would haunt investigators for years. Skeletal remains, scattered across the forest floor, were found less than a quarter mile from the Anthony residence. The bones had been wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket, then stuffed inside a garbage bag. Animals and the elements had begun to scatter the remains, but one image stuck out more than any other, a tiny skull, with duct tape still clinging to the jawline. It was an unthinkable scene, the kind that leaves a permanent mark on anyone who sees it. Crime scene techs worked meticulously, sifting through leaves and dirt, documenting every bone, every fiber, every piece of evidence. Days later, DNA testing confirmed what everyone had feared but had not wanted to accept. Caylee was gone. The missing child case had officially become a homicide investigation, and now the world demanded justice. The discovery of the remains shifted the case from a missing child investigation to a full-blown homicide. Casey was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child neglect, and other charges. Prosecutors announced their intent to seek the death penalty. The trial would be one of the most watched in modern history. The prosecution painted Casey Anthony as a young woman trapped by the weight of early motherhood, a 22-year-old who had grown tired of playing the role of responsible parent. They said she longed for freedom, for the nightlife, for a life without diapers, babysitters, or curfews. Caylee, they argued, was no longer a beloved daughter in Casey's eyes, but an obstacle standing in the way of the life she wanted. Their theory was chilling in its simplicity. Casey used chloroform and duct tape to end her daughter's life, placed her in the trunk of her car, and eventually dumped her in the woods. After that, she resumed her carefree lifestyle, partying, shopping, sleeping over at her boyfriend's place, all while Caylee lay alone in a shallow grave. The evidence, prosecutors said, supported this narrative. They introduced computer records showing searches on the family's computer for disturbing phrases, how to make chloroform, neck breaking, and household weapons. These searches occurred weeks before Caylee vanished. Then came the physical evidence. A cadaver dog had alerted to the scent of human decomposition in the trunk of Casey's Pontiac Sunfire. A forensics expert testified that an air sample taken from the trunk contained chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. Even more haunting, a single strand of hair found in the trunk matched Caylee's DNA profile and exhibited signs of postmortem banding, a distinct pattern that occurs only after death. Then there was Casey's behavior. Friends and former roommates testified that she never mentioned Caylee was missing. She laughed, she partied. She appeared carefree. When someone asked where Caylee was, she offered casual, offhand answers. With the nanny, at the beach, at Disney. But behind the smiles and excuses, the prosecution argued, was a calculated effort to hide the truth. But the defense had a very different story. From the moment opening statements began, lead attorney Jose Baez threw the courtroom into shock. Caylee hadn't been murdered, he claimed. According to Baez, the tragic truth was that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family swimming pool on June 16, 2008. He argued that, in a moment of panic, Casey and her father, George Anthony, decided to hide the incident instead of reporting it. It was a stunning pivot from the prosecution's theory, and it shifted the focus entirely. Baez told the jury that the reason Casey lied to police, to her family, and to the world was because she had been raised to lie. He alleged that Casey had endured inappropriate treatment as a child, claiming that her father had caused deep psychological trauma that made secrecy her default response. The accusations were explosive. The courtroom was stunned. George Anthony vehemently denied the abuse allegations. He wept on the stand, visibly shaken, insisting he had nothing to do with Caylee's disappearance or the alleged cover-up. The prosecution fired back, accusing the defense of tossing out shocking accusations without any supporting evidence, an emotional distraction designed to shift the narrative. But the strategy, chaotic as it seemed, worked. Baez didn't need to prove Casey's innocence. He only needed to inject doubt. And he did. There was no definitive cause of death. Caylee's remains were too decomposed to determine exactly how she died. The forensic evidence, while suspicious, wasn't bulletproof. The computer searches for chloroform. The defense suggested they could have been made by anyone with access to the home's computer. The duct tape. Experts disagreed on whether it had been placed before death or became attached during decomposition. There was no eyewitness, no confession, no clear moment of crime. On July 5, 2011, after 6 weeks of testimony and more than 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty of murder, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of manslaughter, just guilty of lying to police. The courtroom was silent, but the shock outside was deafening. The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed as the verdict was read. People sobbed, others shouted. Outside, protesters screamed in disbelief. Justice for Caylee became a national rallying cry. The verdict left a nation divided. Some believed it was a gross miscarriage of justice. Others saw it as a failure of the prosecution to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Casey Anthony walked free. She served a brief sentence for the charges she was convicted of and, after credit for time served, was released later that month. But she didn't return to a normal life. She became one of the most hated figures in America. Threats followed her. Her face was plastered on tabloid covers. Strangers yelled at her in the street. Rumors circulated constantly. Where she lived, how she spent her days, whether she ever spoke of Caylee. She largely stayed hidden from the public eye, surfacing only rarely. Years later, she'd give the occasional interview, each time stirring up more controversy. She maintained her innocence, saying she still didn't know what really happened to Caylee. She insisted she had been misunderstood, that her actions had been misinterpreted. But for many, the damage was already done. The verdict may have acquitted her, but it didn't exonerate her in the court of public opinion. The case of Casey Anthony became more than just a criminal trial. It was a cultural flashpoint, a mirror held up to the legal system, the media, and the public's appetite for justice. It sparked debates about motherhood, privilege, and the burden of proof. It showed how perception can influence everything, from courtroom strategy to public outrage. To this day, people still ask, what really happened to Caylee Anthony? Was it a tragic accident wrapped in lies? Or a calculated decision made by a young woman who wanted a different life? The truth may be known only by one person, and if she knows, she's never told the whole story. Not really. Because even after all the years, all the headlines, all the theories and coverage and public anger, one thing remains chillingly clear. A little girl vanished, and her voice was never heard again.